Well, welcome everyone who's with us live and on the recording. We're so happy to have you with us here today. For those of you who are new to this initiative, the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice, the SLECOP, supported by TIES, which you can find at stemecosystems.org, harnesses the power of business and industry, funders and foundations, K-12 schools, higher education, out-of-school time, state, local, and federal government, and more to find solutions to common problems and to build thriving communities. The SLECOP is focused on being an inclusive STEM community that champions access to innovation, opportunity, equity, and lifelong learning. As you may know, we have not one, but two solar eclipses coming up in the next 6 months. I don't know about all of you. I'm ready. I'm drinking my Tang. This is a lot harder to get than it was back in the 80s, but I'm drinking my Tang. I've got my solar eclipse glasses. They're up on my forehead because I can't see anything. I even showed our special guest before you all came in. I actually bought the big solar filter to put on our family's giant telescope so that we can look right at the eclipse when it comes through, because I live in the Cleveland area and the April eclipse comes right through this region. So everyone in North America will see at least a partial solar eclipse both times. So the excitement about the eclipse should be similar to 2017 in both October and April. However, the path where people can see the annular eclipse on Saturday, October 14th, is quite different from where they can see the total eclipse on Monday, April 8th. The best way to see the two different paths and what everyone in North America will see is to go to the National Science Teaching Association, NSTA website, dedicated to solar eclipse information and resources. That's nsta.org/eclipse. Someone will drop that in the chat. If you scroll down a little, you'll come to the Guide for Educators, which shows in the first few pages the maps for what will happen during each eclipse. And we're so excited today to have Dennis Schatz with us to help ecosystems come up to speed on leveraging these global phenomena that are approaching us to engage students in science. If you have any questions as Dennis is speaking, you've got that little Q&A tool down at the bottom. This is a rare opportunity to get to talk to an expert, not only about this engagement, which I would encourage you to ask questions around, but also around the science, things that you can share with your community. So make sure to put your questions in there. We'll monitor that closely and keep it in front of our speaker today and get to as many of those as possible. Dennis Schatz lives in Seattle, Washington, and is a senior fellow at the Institute for Learning Innovation. He's a leader in the Solar Eclipse Task Force of the American Astronomical Society and in the Solar Eclipse Activity for Library Seal project to distribute 5 million safe viewing glasses and information for the upcoming eclipse through 10,000 public libraries, funded by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. He's also the past president of the National Science Teaching Association, the NSTA, and spent most of his career at Pacific Science Center, where much of his focus was in connecting in-school and out-of-school STEM learning. All right, Dennis, we were talking before you came, or before everybody else came in, about these solar eclipse classes. I know that they're really critical. I know that the last time they got a little hard to get kind of closer to the eclipse, so it might be worth people looking into those earlier. But I'm wondering if you have any other important sort of safety things we should think about when we're talking about these eclipse classes and working with young people.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. Actually, I'll be talking a lot about the alternative ways in which to view the eclipses if you don't have access to glasses. I know a lot of people want to see them. I consider them a little bit of overrated because what you see through there is just this little dot. And there's lots of ways to get some great images, which I'll talk about later on.
And I know that when I put these on, I can't see you. I know that it's just a little dot in the sun, which is there may be better options, but it protects our eyes. But I can't see anything right now. And I know that you were telling me about working with a particular principal.
That's true. Now, so you're not supposed to see anything but the sun through these. So if you can see anything, you don't have the right glasses. But yeah, last time we had real problems with administrators. I'm going to talk about that later too, who weren't letting students go outside to view the eclipse because of safety reasons. And we had one principal who told teachers that they would let the students go out, walk down to a local park to see the eclipse, as long as they wore their glasses while they were walking to the park. And it took the teachers a long time to explain that it would be more dangerous to walk to the park with your glasses on because you can't see anything.
I don't understand what the problem is of taking a bunch of elementary students, making them totally visually impaired, and then having them cross traffic. But sometimes we have to figure these things out. So Dennis, I'm curious. You know, we all have our journeys and our kind of origin stories. What is it that got you sort of excited and interested in science when you were young?
I was involved with science fairs when I was young. Actually, my brother, who was 4 years older than I was, he did science fair projects, and I was, the little brother that went, oh, well, my brother did it, I have to do it, or I should do it maybe. And so I got involved with science fairs, and I did some astronomy ones. I actually sent to embassies around the world to have them collect dirt from gutters high up on tall buildings, and I was looking for micrometeorites. I don't remember how I got into wanting to do that, but it was just fascinating and it got me all excited. And so I became an astronomer by training, actually a solar astronomer. So I'm very excited about the solar eclipses and what's happening on the sun right now, which I'll be talking about.
I know I'm really looking forward to it. You talk to people who've been in, the kind of center of the path of a total eclipse, and the way they talk about it is it's almost spiritual. Just the experience and how unusual and different it is. So I know I'm really excited to experience that for myself. Dennis, I'm excited to learn from you. So whenever you're ready, go ahead and share your screen and let's hear about these eclipses.
Okay, I'll do that.
Is it the multiple? Is it eclipses? This is while you're loading that up.
Yes, it is. Well, one eclipse, two eclipses, or more.
It is eclipses. I wasn't sure.
Thanks, Dennis.
Okay. So, oops, this is we've already been introduced. So here we are, first slide. Delighted to be here. We do have these two solar eclipses coming and make a nice X across the sky. As Jeremy mentioned, they are in totally two different paths. What's really important is that everybody in North America will see a partial eclipse. And while it's exciting to be in the path of totality or the path of annularity, we want to make sure that everybody is excited and knows what a wonderful thing these eclipses are and how unusual they are. This will be the last total solar eclipse in the United States until 2045. As much as I want to see it in 2045, I don't think I'll be around here. So let's talk a little bit about what causes eclipses. Solar eclipses, a key thing is that the moon comes in front of the sun. And so it's a nice diagram. There's three different kinds of eclipses. Depending where the moon is in its orbit, it has an elliptical orbit, so sometimes it's further away, sometimes it's closer. When it's closer, you get the mondo moon, the super moon that people always talk about, so it's bigger. And when it's big enough, it totally covers the sun, and you get that beautiful solar corona that you get to see, which is why people want to travel 10,000 miles and spend $10,000 to go see it. Absolutely beautiful. But some of the time, and actually about a third of the time, the moon is further out in its orbit. And just like if you take your thumb and hold it near your eye, you can cover up the screen. And when you put your thumb further out, it takes up less of the screen. Same thing happens to the moon. It appears smaller. And so part of the time in its orbit, it doesn't cover the sun completely. And you get what's called an annular eclipse, or a lot of people call it the ring of fire eclipse, because there's an annulus of bright sun around the edge. And then another third of the time, actually, there's only a partial eclipse. The alignment isn't exactly right, and you only see a partial eclipse. But what we're going to see coming up on October 14th, so just about a month away, so get ready, it's called the Great American West, or the American West eclipse, because it's happening mainly in the Southwest. You can see the states that it's in. And this is the kind of sequence that you would see if you were to go out and observe it. So the moon will slowly cover the sun until there's an annular eclipse. Now, this is if you're in the path of totality. And here's where the path of totality is. Still want to emphasize, everywhere in the United States, there'll be a partial eclipse to enjoy. And a lot of people are thinking about the annular eclipse because of it going through a lot of national parks. You can see Utah, New Mexico, think about all the national parks that are out there. starts early in the morning in Oregon, and then about noon, it goes out through Texas, goes into Central America, actually into South America. But we're not showing that whole map. Now, the big event for most people, certainly for people in the eastern part of the United States, is what's being called the Great North American Total Solar Eclipse. Goes through Mexico, United States, and Canada. And here's what you would see if you're in the path of totality. This is just before totality, where that last little, what's often called the diamond ring effect, the last little light of the sun is coming through before you see the full extent of the solar corona, although you can see it a little bit here. And this one goes through much of the Texas, the central part, and the Midwest, and up through the Northeast. So it's the one where there's the largest population. You can see it goes through San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, Indianapolis. If you're thinking of getting married, goes through Niagara Falls. Good time to get married. That'd be unusual. Cleveland.
Well, I'll tell you, Dennis,
edge,
my
right?
brother-in-law is getting married during the annular eclipse, and it won't, where he'll be will only be about 40%, but it's right in the middle of the time frame, and I have every intention of saying something like, if the universe has a problem with this marriage, then blot out the sun. See if I can get like an Aztec-style prophecy going.
All right, that sounds great. Well, I was interested he picked that date. I assume he didn't pick the date because of the annular eclipse.
He did not, no.
Yeah. So this is where everybody has to be for the, if you wanted to see the total eclipse. Of course, I keep on emphasizing a partial eclipse will be everywhere, and we want everyone to enjoy that. We'll talk more about that in general. The one thing to keep in mind, the further north you are, the more likely it is to be cloudy during that time of year. It actually, all these really big eclipse chasers are heading to Mazatlan in Mexico because that's where the best weather is predicted to be. But as I mentioned, everybody in North America will see a partial eclipse, and it's well worth seeing. So then the question is, how many people are going to get to see this? So we've made a calculation of the people in the US, Canada, and Mexico that will see an eclipse of some kind. It's almost 500 million people. And as you can imagine, if you want to get solar viewing glasses like Jeremy has on his head, it's going to be a challenging time finding 500 million glasses. Now we'll talk more about this. Not everybody needs glasses. It takes 2.5 hours for a solar eclipse to go from beginning to end. So actually, there's parts of it that's pretty boring. It's sitting around like waiting for water to boil on simmer, something like that. So you can pass around the glasses, get a view, and that sort of thing. There is a major program which you should be aware of to distribute it. It was originally 5 million glasses through 10,000 libraries, funded by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. But the National Science Foundation added funding for another 1 million. So now we're distributing 6 million glasses through more than 13,000 plus public libraries in the United States. So you may be able to link up with the libraries in your location, not only to get glasses, but to learn about it, because they're not only distributing glasses, they're doing programming. I'm visiting 8 libraries in the next 2 weeks to work with the public. So all these libraries are supposed to be doing that kind of programming. So you should check with them. Jeremy can put in the chat the link to the SEAL program, Solar Eclipse Activities for Libraries. And there you can actually see a map of the United States that shows where the libraries are. And we picked libraries because every community has a library. They're free. And it's a great place in which to, and their goal is to provide information. That's their whole purpose. I do want to point out one of the great resources that's out there for, we think about it for educators, but it's really useful for everybody. It's at the National Science Teaching Association, and Jeremy mentioned it earlier, and he can put that, I think he's already put that in the chat. But this is the website. It's dedicated to the eclipses. This is what you see on the first page. If you were to scroll down, the 3 most important items from our perspective are these guides that have been produced. The one on the left is a guide for educators, 28 pages. Please download it. It's all free. There's a QR code if you like QR codes to get to the website. In the middle are one-page handouts. It's really two-sided one page. Handouts that can go home to families, caregivers, friends. It gives key information about each of the eclipses. The one for October 14th, another one for October 8th. October 8th, April 8th. And then the one on the right, if you're working with administrators that are a little bit leery about whether my students should go out, my youth should go out and participate, this is a 4-page document for administrators to make them feel comfortable. And I'll talk about that in more detail as we go on. If you scroll down further, there's a number of web seminars that are provided. A number of these, the one like in August 31st, 2023, which we just did, the second from the right, very similar to what you're getting here. So you don't really have to go look at that recording. But the one on the left, which is coming up actually later today, not that you want to see 2 webinars in one day, is really focused on safe viewing techniques and what to do with administrators, which I'll be covering to some extent today too. But there'll be future web seminars coming up. There's great resources from NSTA for teachers and educators. Solar science is curriculum materials, which I will talk about later. And then there's a children's book called When the Sun Goes Dark. And I'll talk about that later too, so I'm not going to talk about it now. The other key thing, normally you have to be a member of NSTA to get access to their journals, but the articles, actually the issues that relate to the eclipses will be on the website, free to you. So keep an eye on that. You can see the front cover of Science Scope, which is the middle school journal. That just came out in summer, and the high school one and this elementary level are going to come out in the fall. Lots of information about the eclipses, as well as things that you can do with your youth, an after school program, in a school program, whatever is appropriate. Lots of other resources. There's an NSTA collection. There's one resource of free activities you can find on the web related to eclipses. Another one that connects to music, language arts, literature. So there's a lot of other resources. And finally, we have connections to other organizations that are doing lots. You certainly see a lot from NASA, American Astronomical Society, and so on. So we like to think it as one-stop shopping, probably not totally one-stop shopping, but pretty close to it. Things coming up, I already mentioned the journals. If anybody happens to be going to the NSTA conference in Kansas City, we'll have sessions there, and we'll have future web seminars also. Let me say a little bit about Administrator's Guide. You heard about the challenge we had last time with that one administrator, but we'd had many educators who were all prepared. They were going to take their youth out to observe. And at the last minute, administrators, nope, can't take them outside, too dangerous. And so this guide really focuses on several key messages. First of all, for educators, is talk to your administrators early and often so that they're aware and are convinced that it's valuable to go out. Then, of course, you have to convince them it is valuable to go out. And so here we have kind of a once in a generation. Again, the next one's going to be, 21 years after this April. So it really is once in a generation opportunity to go out and actually see this event live, unless you travel to somewhere else in the world, and use it as a learning opportunity. And here's some people out. This is actually an educator workshop out learning about what causes eclipses. So it's a great opportunity to take your students out. The most important message we have is how safe they are. This was a study, peer-reviewed study in a scientific journal called Eye by a group of ophthalmologists who studied whether there was any eye damage in the 1999 solar eclipse in the United Kingdom. And the bottom line is there was no recorded cases of permanent visual loss. It really is difficult. It's not that you can't damage your eyes, but people don't like to look at the sun. And if you take all of the precautions we're talking about, it won't be dangerous. And there's so many easy viewing techniques besides having glasses. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. But this is a good example. Everybody has, not everybody, but most people have a pasta colander or a salad colander. It makes a great pinhole projector, gives you hundreds of images of the eclipse sun.
That's good.
Yeah, that's great. And the other thing to think about is, you don't have to do this all alone. There's lots of other places and people who can help. As I mentioned, the libraries now, you should check out and see if your local library is doing something. NASA has great resources. Amateur astronomy clubs. The booklet that I mentioned at the NSTA website, the 28-page booklet, lists actual links to different amateur groups, astronomy departments, night sky networks. You can think about all of these as possible partners to help you explain what's happening and engage with your youth.
Yeah, I know that here in Cleveland, I know the Cuyahoga County Park System, the Science Center, and the Natural History Museum are all planning on having events that day. Probably others too, but at a minimum, there are going to be a lot of organizations out there. Another interesting thing to think about are organizations that are sort of listed there, but think about any organization that has a planetarium, a telescope, anything along those lines. There's probably a good chance that they're going to host some kind of event if that's part of their focus area.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I don't know of a science center or naturalist museum that's not doing something. A lot of amateur groups. I know the amateur group here is already planning to have some events. Of course, many of those amateurs want to go to the path of totality, but a lot of them are doing programming ahead of time. They know that people need to get ready for it. So if you can link up with them, that'd be great. And again, there's links to websites that give you individuals that you can find in that resource material from NSTA. And I just a couple of examples of what people did in 2017. I won't mention all of them, but the last two I really like. First, we invited a meteorologist to come in to talk about weather and what to expect and talk about viewing safety. Another one brought in an eye doctor and actually talked about it. Use that as an opportunity, not just to talk about astronomy and the sun, but to go beyond that. What I thought I'd do is I've been going a mile a minute here, is to just pause for a moment. I can't see the chat, but
No
if there's
problem.
any questions in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that before anybody put anything in the tool, Melissa did have a couple of questions. Melissa, are you there with us?
Yes, I am. How are you?
Hi, Melissa.
Hi. I was asking about the new moon is only when we would get the eclipses, right?
That's correct. You have to have a new moon. If you think about it, the moon has to be in line with the sun, so the sun's lighting the backside of the moon, so we see the dark side. And so, yes, it's the new moon. And what comes out of that, if you get into thinking about eclipses, and it also explains why the lunar eclipse always happens at full moon.
Okay, so the lunar eclipse is at the full moon and the solar eclipse is at the new moon.
Correct.
All right, and my last question, why does the moon appears red sometimes?
So you're thinking of a lunar eclipse, I think, or when you see a lunar eclipse and it goes into the shadow of the Earth, what happens there is the sunlight, and when it hits the Earth and comes through the atmosphere at the edge of the sun, it filters out all the colors but red, and so the red light actually gets bent and goes and lights up the moon and then reflects back to us. So what we're doing is seeing kind of in the same way that you get a reddish sunset.
Yes.
Reddish moon for the same reason that our atmosphere is filtering out all other colors but the red.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your question, Melissa. Laura, I know, has some questions as well. Laura, you there with us?
Yep. Can you hear me?
We've got you.
All right. So my question was that I saw the total eclipse in 2017, and the most surprising thing to me was that it didn't get completely dark or like black during totality. It got darker, but it was more like twilight with like a dark blue sky. And it was still really cool, but the pictures you see are always of the totally black sun and the black sky. And so that's sort of what I was expecting. And I mean, there were changes, like streetlights came on and the birds change and you could see like 1 or 2 stars, but I was expecting like all the constellations to be visible and stuff. So like, how would you explain to kids what to expect at totality so they still think it's cool, but aren't disappointed that it's not like midnight looking?
What a great question, Dennis. How do we? Why isn't this like Apocalypto? And how should we kind of phrase the hype so that it's accurate hype?
Well, and that's fair enough. Well, again, first of all, most people are going to just see a partial eclipse, and you actually have to get up to like 95% for it to start to get dark. So most people, won't even know. If they don't look up, they won't even know that it's there's an eclipse going on. So that's one thing. But if you're in the path of totality, first of all, it depends where you are. So if you're over on the edge, you got to think about this. What you're in is a shadow that's 100 miles across or so. If you're right in the middle, 150 miles away is where it's sunlight. So if you happen to be near the edge, so you're 5 miles away, well, there's a lot of light that's only 5 miles away. And of course, at nighttime, that's not true. It's where sunlight is thousands of miles away. So that's the reason it doesn't get totally dark. But even if you're right in the middle, the fact that again you're 50 miles away, there's enough light. If you just think about the fact that the sun is brightly shining down on that area that's away from totality, and going back up into the atmosphere and getting scattered, so it doesn't get totally dark. And I have to admit, the photos are a bit misleading because you take a picture. Of course, you got a bright sun. I mean, it's not as bright as the full sun, but you have the corona you're looking at, so you're taking a picture of something that's almost as bright as the moon, maybe. And so everything else turns dark. You can't get the right register. So I think the important thing, if I go back to what I was saying, what I will say is what you can see if they're up there are the planets. Those are often interesting to pick out. But I would talk about the fact that the same thing, and when you're at nighttime, where daytime is thousands of miles away. In a total eclipse, daytime is only 50 miles or even less. And so you're getting a lot of scattered light into the atmosphere. I hope that helps.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Dennis. All right, so what's next?
All right, let me move on. Those are great questions. This is a good group. Often they don't say much. Well, what I really want to do now is to talk about safe viewing. Everybody wants to have solar viewing glasses, but there's never going to be enough for everybody. Again, 500 million glasses is a lot. I already said this earlier, not everybody needs glasses. It takes 2.5 hours to go through totality from beginning to end. If you're in the path of totality, you have to take your glasses off to see the 4 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever you have. So you don't use the glasses during totality. Now, annularity is different. If you're in the path of annularity, there's still part of the sun showing you have to use your glasses the whole time. But typically, most people don't need glasses. We're giving out at the libraries I'm working at, we're giving out 2 per family at the most. I'm trying to encourage even 1 because we are not in totality here. I know Jeremy will put in the chat here the 3 companies that produce solar viewing glasses. The top 2 are the ones that I would pick the most. In my mind, they have the best options. And you can think about, a lot of people say, well, how can I get glasses? Libraries don't have very many to give out, but that might be one place to look at. But we, in 2017, a lot of local companies, local hardware store, were willing to purchase glasses for a school, for 300 glasses for a school or something like that. In other cases, schools bought the glasses and then sold them as a school activity. So get the PSTA involved, the parent organization. This is one group that sold them for $1 each, bought them for 50 cents, sold them for $1 and made a little bit of money, and that went to other school projects later on. So you can think about creative ways in which to do this. Again, this is related to schools, but after school program could do this. Church programs could do this. The other thing I really want to point out is you got to remember the glasses are needed for 6 months. You get to have them for October, and you need to save them for 6 months and then have them for April. And so the SEAL program has produced a do-it-yourself protective glass case for it. It's just a piece of paper that's folded over, easy to make, great way to protect your glasses. If you go to that SEAL website, you can easily find a link to this activity. So don't think, remember, you have to keep them for 6 months. So think about ways in which you can keep them safe. Back to what I said earlier, I think glasses are overrated. This is a view of what you see through glasses. It's a little round circle. And of course, during totality, it would be a slight crescent or whatever, depending on what level of totality, what level of partial eclipse you have. Back to what I showed earlier, this is one of my favorite, easiest ways in which to view without solar glasses. You may even have solar glasses, but you should be doing some of these indirect views. Again, you hold the calendar out with the sun over your shoulder, white piece of paper off to the left, and what you see is this shadow with hundreds of images of the partial eclipse. Some schools, some organizations have this interesting sun spotter, which is a single-use telescope. It costs around like $300. So you might hear, most people would say, I'm not spending $300 just to go and see this one eclipse. But here you can see the beautiful image it makes of an annular eclipse.
I love that. By single use, you mean this is all it can be used for, not it can only be used once, correct?
Yeah, correct. I'm sorry. It can only be used for viewing the sun. And it's very safe. You can't get in there and look through the eyepiece and try and see it directly. But if you don't have discretionary money, which most people don't, you can just make one yourself, basically out of a pair of binoculars if you have it, or if you have a small telescope. You cover up the one eyepiece or one of the viewers of the binoculars, and then you project an image of the sun down on a piece of paper, and it looks something like this. Now you get a much bigger image. You can have a whole group of people around looking at it, so you can see it, and you'll see what's amazing, what you can see, the kind of detail. In a minute here, I'll show that. Here's a couple other people that have just set up their telescope or set up their binoculars to view. You can see the size. You get something that's maybe 4 or 5 inches across. Beautiful image on the right of a partial eclipse. Now, you may sit here and say, I don't have a tripod. I have a pair of binoculars, but I don't have a tripod. Well, that's okay. Go and get a bag of Play-Doh. So you can go buy a 5-pound bag of Play-Doh, put it into a plastic bag, and now you have yourself a do-it-yourself or make your own tripod. You just push the part of the binoculars you're not using down into the Play-Doh, move it around, direct it towards the sun, and it makes a great tripod. What makes it nice to project an image through binoculars is that you get to see what's on the surface of the sun. Pinhole projectors, solar viewing glasses don't allow for this. The image isn't big enough. It isn't sharp enough. And here's a beautiful view of a solar eclipse with a wonderful sunspot right in the middle of the sun. And to give you a sense of what you're going to see, here was the view of the sun on July 17th, only a couple months ago. Lots of sunspots. There'll be lots of sunspots on the sun, both in October and April. This is solar maximum. As some people may know, the sun goes through an 11-year sunspot cycle where it has lots of sunspots, and then it has very few, 7 or 5.5 years later. And then 5.5 years later, it has lots of sunspots. It's been doing that for centuries, probably been doing it forever. In 2017, we were at solar minimum, and it looked like this. Pretty boring. We're now at solar maximum, lots of beautiful sunspots to see. So I encourage you to figure out, you'd want to explore and build your solar viewing through a pair of binoculars ahead of time. You wouldn't want to do it for the first time when you're doing the eclipse. Now, maybe you don't want to go to a lot of trouble. The easiest pinhole projector, you have a colander that I mentioned, but if you wanted to do a project, so every student has their own pinhole projector, this is an easy one. Piece of cardboard with aluminum foil, in a rectangle in the center. You just put a pinhole in the middle, white piece of paper, and you now have an image of the sun that you're projecting onto the. Lots of people like to do school projects to build pinhole projectors with shoe boxes or cereal boxes. Any kind of box will work. And now you have the pinhole projector here. There's an aluminum foil with a pinhole viewing port here, and then you see on the piece of paper in the back, you see the image of the sun. And it too is, it's a little bit bigger than what you see directly, but it's relatively small, slightly fuzzy, and you really can't see any sunspots that way.
Dennis, I'm curious. I've got two kind of questions about some of the things that you're talking about before you get too far. The first is Melissa's asking, with these glasses, ignoring the fact that it's little, it's still a nice way to get a lot of people viewing if you can get your hands on them. But how do we as educators know that the ones that we buy are safe and that kids are going to be able to use them safely? Is there a good way to tell?
Yeah, that's fair enough. And I have to admit, although I think glasses are overrated, the fact that I get to look directly at the sun has a lot of enthusiasm. So I think it's great. I just want to make sure that nobody feels bad. It's sort of like, oh, if I can't get them, then I should stay inside, or I should.
Lots of options. Yeah.
And here before I come and answer your question, here's another way. Do a large box. Now you can make it so you actually have a dark view, because you can stick your whole head in it. So a lot of fun here if you want to make something that's really big.
Plus, it makes for a good picture to see all your principals and superintendents walking around with boxes on their heads.
Yeah, it's very true. So back to, first of all, if you get your glasses from American Paper Optics or the other one that Rainbow Optics, Rainbow Symphony, you can get guaranteed. But the way to know is, and you should look on the side of your glasses, Jeremy. If you look at one of the eyepieces over here on the side, it should say ISO certified and some number. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, mine does say ISO. It doesn't say, although I also cannot read tiny print anymore. And I got these ones from salunaglasses.com.
Yeah. So
it does have an ISO logo. Okay, so we're looking for an ISO certification to be told.
ISO certification. We had problems last year. Some people who were involved in 2017 in the Amazon, and I'm sure they'll be selling them this time too. People would go to Amazon and there were lots of knockoff solar viewing glasses. My guess is that they were probably all safe. If you can't see anything other than the sun through whatever you're looking at, they're probably safe. As soon as you can see a light bulb or any sort of bright wall or whatever, then they're not safe. You can certainly, sunglasses are not, but that ISO certification is what's important. And we're trying to work with Amazon this time to make sure they do a better job.
And so I have one other question about the ones that you shared, and that's the Sun Spotter solar telescope. I'm glancing at just pictures of this, and it looks like those of us, and in this organization, a lot of us do have access to digital fabrication spaces and CNCs and laser cutters and all of those things. Is there anything specialized with that Sun Spotter Keplerian telescope, or is it basically pieces of wood in certain angles that potentially there are plans out there that we could find and build?
I don't know if there are plans out there. I think I have seen plans for different make your own sun spotter in a sense. What this really is a folded telescope. You can see my pointer, right?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, so there's a lens here that takes.
Okay, so you do need a lens. It's not just like the collar.
Right, you need a lens here. So that goes down to a mirror, bounces up to here, that bounces down to here.
Interesting. Okay.
Back up to here, and it goes through an eyepiece, just like you have in a telescope, and then pushes the image down here. So the expensive part of this would not be making, the wood, or you can make it out of cardboard even. It's the price of the lens, the objective, as we would say, and then the eyepiece that's in here. Those are the expensive parts. So it's somebody who is, really shop smart could make one pretty easily. And I'm sure there must be, if you Google sun spotter, DIY.
Yeah, there's probably some plans, but you would need to get some mirrors and lenses as well. It wouldn't just be something that you could manufacture.
Right.
Okay.
The mirrors wouldn't be expensive. They're basically just flat mirrors, but the lens, the objective out here, and the eyepiece, which you can't see in here, it's right in here, are the expensive parts.
Gotcha. Perfect. All right, so I do have one other question that came in from folks, but I'll get to that at the end. I know we're continuing on. So what else do you have to share with us?
Okay. Well, this is my last. Oops. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure this is my last idea for pinhole projection, actually, or way to view it. So we've been talking about pinhole projection. So you have a pinhole that light comes through and then it projects onto a white piece of paper. I call this a pinhole reflector. So now underneath here is a hand mirror. This is what I use in the bathroom, covered with a piece of cardboard and a hole in the middle. So now it's a pinhole reflector. Sun comes in from the right, comes in this way, hits the mirror and comes back out. So it's coming back out through the pinhole. And now you can project it onto a wall. So ideally you set yourself up so you're in the sun, the wall's in the shade, and you can now project an image. So a whole lot of hundreds of people could see an image of a partial eclipse. Now I'm hand holding this. You can't really hand hold it. You need to put it in that bag of Play-Doh or on your tripod. You'd like to think you're really steady, but when you project something very far, your hand, just a little movement makes it challenging. So that's my last, and actually my next slide was for questions, but you've been asking them so far. But do you want to ask that question you had now, or do you want me to?
Sure, absolutely. Laura again is talking about how the last time in 2017 that somebody, she thinks the Smithsonian had an app that not only could you find kind of exact timing, but even had like a countdown to your exact location. Do you have any idea if similar apps are going to be available this time, and where folks might look to find those?
Well, so she thought it was the Smithsonian. I would try the Smithsonian. I have not seen the countdown. There are lots of sites to get specifics for yourself. As I mentioned, the NSTA guide has these two handouts, and there is a link. And again, since they're PDFs, they are embedded links, so you can find it in there. And it takes you put in your city. You know, I'm in Akron, Ohio, or San Angelo, Texas. You put in the name of your city, and it'll tell you when the eclipse starts, when it's maximum, and if you're in partial eclipse, which most people will, what percentage of the sun is covered, and then when it ends. And if you're in totality, it gives you, how long is totality. So I would recommend going to that educator's guide, downloading it, and you'll find at the end, and in the body of it, links to how to find out what's happening at your place. But it does not, the places I know of, doesn't give you a countdown for your location. I had not seen that before.
And so, Laura, if you happen to find that, please go ahead and share that with Xanne or Lauren, and we'll make sure to get that out to everybody. I also love that Vivian Dennis mentions in the chat that she's used a disco ball before too, which is, I think, kind of fun. If you could get little tiny images of the sun shining and moving all over the place to go along with your music, that could be a lot of fun.
And that's a cool idea. And of course, there's lots of, people talk about if you're where deciduous trees are, and if you look at the shadow of a tree, often because the leaves overlap, that they make little pinholes, and so you'll see little crescent moons. You don't really notice it when it's not an eclipse, but really what you're getting all the time are little circular images of the sun. Just during the eclipse, you get the little crescent kind of thing.
This gives a good opportunity to mention my favorite Japanese word, Dennis. I'm sure I'll say it poorly because I don't speak Japanese, but it's something like komarebi, and it's a word that means sunlight which is filtered through the leaves of trees, which is a beautiful word, I think, and then adds on kind of this extra significance when we're talking about the eclipse.
Yeah, and lots of beautiful images. You can actually make, it doesn't work really well for me, but if you just cross your hands, you're making a whole bunch of pinhole projectors. And so you now just hold your hands and let that fall onto the ground or onto a white wall. and you got a bunch of pinhole projectors. So that's even cheaper than a colander. You might have to go out and buy a colander, but here you can make a bunch with just your fingers. All right,
I'm excited. I'm going to try all sorts of these. At our eclipse party, I want like 14 different ways for people to view. So I'm excited for this whole list. All right, what's up next, Dennis?
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about kinds of activities to help people understand what causes eclipses. I mean, one, you can just tell them, but what are the things you can do with a group of youth? You know, it could be at an after-school program. It could be in a classroom, a summer camp. You know, if you think about or winter camp, in this case, summer camp's over with, I guess, but if people are doing sort of camp programs over the Christmas holidays, then this is the kind of thing you can do. I'm going to use this material, Solar Science, which is really geared towards middle school. But if you go to those journal articles I mentioned that are on the NSTA website, Science in Children has articles for elementary and primary. Middle school has ones for middle school age kids, and then the science teacher for high school. And it's all some variation on these. You don't have to do them all, but I wanted to give a quick overview. And I know I'm running close on time, so I might skip a little bit of this. One of the cool activities in this, both in the journals and in the book, is to start to get an understanding of what youth already know. We have them cut out 6 photographs of the moon and then put them in the order they think they will see them when they go out. We're not trying to have them learn the phases at this point. We just want to know their preconceptions, what do they know, and get them interested in going out and actually observing. And you get various different things. You get, you know, kind of what I call the half sequence. You get other people that know the moon goes through phases and it goes around the Earth. They often put an Earth right here in the middle. Ultimately, they have to go out and observe. So this is the kind of thing where it takes a while. So this really is probably best suited for a classroom situation. But they ultimately discover for themselves the order of the phases of the moon. It takes about a month. Maybe we should call each one a month, because that's really where the word month comes from. And ultimately, there's some activities to model what's happening. So you use your head as the Earth, a light bulb is the sun, and then here a styrofoam ball that you can use tennis balls or whatever to really understand the different phases. And here we see the question that was brought up earlier, the student making a solar eclipse, and you can see that it's a new moon to her that's causing the eclipse of the sun. Some of the things that come up is why do so few people get to see a solar eclipse, but so many people get to see a lunar eclipse? And this is a good way to see it on this diagram anyway. Here we have the solar eclipse, just 100-mile and across group here gets to see the total eclipse. But when the moon comes into the shadow of the Earth, everybody on the night side gets to see it. So lunar eclipse is a bit of dime a dozen, happens for everybody. I think I'm going to skip over this a little bit just because I want to give more time. Well, this is too much because this will come up. We have a full moon and a new moon every month. Why aren't there eclipses every month? We had an eclipse in 2017. 7 years later, we're having 2 eclipses in 6 months. Before 2017, the last eclipse in the continental United States was 39 years earlier in 1979. Why does that happen? And why do people spend so much money to go see these things? And we use hula hoops to help people understand that because the orbit of the moon, this green hula hoop here, is inclined slightly to the orbit of the Earth around the sun, it's only at the crossing points that they can line up. So only every 6 months do they line up. And you actually have to have a solar eclipse somewhere on the Earth every 6 months and a lunar eclipse every 6 months. So there are 4 eclipses of some sort every year. It's just that we don't happen to be in the right spot. And that's what's so exciting about. And here you can see this limited shadow going, or the moon shadow going across the Earth. And you can see it only covers a small part of the Earth, unlike the lunar eclipse where you get to see it all. And here's the modeling of this, where my head's the Earth, that styrofoam ball is the moon, and you can see just this small part of the shadow covering me. And if I'm not in the right spot, my eyes are not in the right spot, I don't get to see this solar eclipse. Where now I put the moon at full moon. It's no longer full moon, it's eclipse, but you can see everybody on the back of my head. If there were little people crawling around my head, could see the lunar eclipse. And to give you a sense of where you have to go and where these eclipses, here are the total and annular eclipses between 2021 and 2030. And as you can see, most of them happen over water because the Earth is mainly over oceans. So you really do have to go a long ways if you want to see total solar eclipse. And again, if you look at the percentages, only 1/3 are total, about 1/3 are total, 1/3 annular, 1/3 are only partial. So it's only on the average every 18 months do you actually have a total eclipse. Now it's not exactly, it's not like it goes annular, total, partial, annular. It varies a lot, but they don't happen as often as people would like to think, to say the least. I want to encourage, this is a great book related to solar eclipses, often a read aloud by educators. It's about and it's available from NSTA Press. And actually most libraries, our library here in Seattle has 4 copies, so you should check out and see if you can get one from the library to use in your programming. Of course, you can buy it. We don't mind that either. It's about 2 grandparents who come to home from eclipse chasing. They went out to see an eclipse. They come to celebrate their granddaughter's birthday. And the kids, of course, are totally like, why do you chase eclipses? What causes them? And the grandparents actually do the teaching of the children, the grandchildren. And here you can see them using some of the techniques that I just talked about, using tennis balls around a lamp that they took the shade off of. Even the hula hoops are in use to explain why we don't have them every other month. Every month. And with that, I have 5 minutes left. I wanted to give enough time for questions. I wish everybody clear skies for the eclipses in 2023 and 2024.
Well, Dennis, we certainly appreciate you taking the time. I'm sure there will be even more questions that come up, but I think we had some really great questions today. As I'm sort of closing right now, if anybody has any other questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. And if we catch them in time, we'll throw them right in the middle of closing. If we don't, as always, we'll email those out to Dennis to make sure that he can get those answered. So I wanted to talk before we close and before we thank Dennis about a couple of upcoming things today. The first is, in case you missed it,